Welcome to this brand new announcement from EFE Road. We're here at Ipswich Transport Museum, housed in the former Ipswich trolleybus depot, and is today home to a fantastic collection of superbly restored vintage vehicles ranging from fire engines to trams to bicycles and even trolleybuses. Being EFE Road though, we're here for the buses and to introduce 6 brand new models. Take it away, Jake. It is of course the beautiful Bedford OB coach, of which Mully's Motorways number 26 behind me was one of over 12,700 of the type that were built. The OB itself is celebrating its 85th anniversary this year, but it's also a significant piece of tooling for EFE because the very first one was made nearly 30 years ago, back in 1995. Now, before we look at the new models we're doing for this particular batch, let's find out a little bit more about the OB type in general. Of course, number 26 here is part of the Ipswich Transport Museum Trust collection, and to tell us a little bit more about the type is Mark Smith, who's the chairman of the trustees.
Well, Gary, the OB is probably a typical coach of the 40s, 50s and into the 1960s. The total quantity built was somewhere in the region of 13,000, so lots of them were built, and the Vista version here, which was built by Duple, was probably the most typical of the lot. So we're really proud to have one here at the museum as part of our collection.
Instantly recognisable type, isn't it?
Absolutely, and akin to a big car really.
Yeah.
You've got a 28 horsepower engine, and this is a 27 seat coach, so with 27 passengers and a driver, you've got 1 horsepower per person.
Absolutely, it's got that distinctive bull nose, isn't it, at the Bedford front is.
That's right, and it was a very successful type because I think it managed to combine sort of mechanical simplicity, I suppose, with fantastic looks.
Yeah.
It's a brilliantly engineered vehicle. It was designed specifically for passenger use, so the lorry version of the O series was actually slightly different to this. They managed to produce a vehicle that was loved by everybody really, because they were mechanically simple, so they were easy to look after, they were easy to drive, they were comfortable, they had a good turn of speed, and they gave a good miles per gallon as well. So really they were probably one of the most significant vehicle types of the era really.
Yeah, because I mean production started just before the war, didn't it? Second World War, but production also carried on through war years.
That's right. There were about 70 built before the war, and then there were 3,300 odd, I think, during wartime, the OWB, and then once you got into the post-war era, they really couldn't keep up with the demand. So between 1946 and 1951, that was when the bulk of the OB type was actually produced, and you literally saw them everywhere.
Yeah, they were used nationwide, weren't they?
Absolutely, and they were used for all sorts of things. So a day out at the seaside, a pub to play darts, that sort of thing. So it really is a very typical vehicle of the era.
And Mully's itself, did they have quite a few?
Mully's had a selection of OBs. This was one that they actually bought new.
Right.
So that was what really singled this one out, and because we're based here in Ipswich, this was bought from the local Bedford dealer. So 1,500 quid well spent, I think. That's about what they cost at the time.
Really, was it?
Absolutely, yeah.
You get a lot for your money then these days, don't you?
Certainly do, yeah.
So having looked at the history of the real things, let's take a look at our 6 new Bedford OB models. They continue the legacy of their exclusive first edition's predecessors, but now feature wing mirrors for the first time. Each is finished in a highly detailed livery that represents its full-size counterpart during its working career, or in preservation where appropriate. We begin with registration LLW 837, a 1950 built example that joined the B&G Margot of Bexley Heath fleet for a 2-year period from 1963. Our model depicts the coach during this period in Margot's 2-tone red livery with Bexley Heath Transport Company Limited branding. ACC 712 went new to Wight Way of Winevower near Carnarvon in 1949, one of 7 OBs to be operated by the firm. In its plain white livery, it remained a familiar sight on North Wales roads until the mid-1970s. Our model features a Bethgelert and Portmaddock destination blind, as was typically carried. Registration 1949 MN was one of a pair of Bedford OBs that saw service with Douglas-based coach operator Tours Isle of Man from the late 1980s to the early 2020s. Here it carried the name Lady Maeve, and in its distinctive blue paintwork was a popular attraction on sightseeing tours across the island. Our next model is PV9371, or Mulleys Motorways number 26, which we saw earlier in the video at Ipswich Transport Museum. It is another 1949 example, which went new to Jack Mulley of Ixworth in Suffolk and remained part of the fleet until 1975. Our model depicts number 26 with a Folkestone destination. Starks of Dunbar in Scotland operated registration SS7486 from the early 1950 until 1972, carrying fleet number C22 after Scottish Omnibuses acquired Starks at the end of 1963. Today it is part of the Scottish Vintage Bus Museum collection at Louthalmond, where it was restored to the condition depicted by our model. Our final OB is registration LRO 296, which during the late 1970s and early 1980s was operated on sightseeing tours by the Mountain Goat of Windermere. Here it received a distinctive white and green livery, complete with green goat emblems, and the name Lil Billy, all of which have been faithfully reproduced on our model. The 6 models come in the standard EFE Road display case and have an RRP of £41.95. Now, let's go back to the Ipswich Transport Museum to find out a little bit more about the real Mulleys Motorways number 26.
It's not every day you get to sit aboard a museum exhibit, and Mulleys Motorways number 26 is a beautifully restored OB, as you can see. But how do you get it to this kind of condition? Now with me is Owen Phillips, one of Ipswich Transport Museum's volunteers, who's had a lot of involvement in the restoration of this particular vehicle. So Owen, how did this one end up in the museum's collection in the first place?
This vehicle was originally acquired in 1975 and it was bought by the museum organisation from the disposal sale at Mulleys.
Right.
And Jack Mulley, he had a large varied fleet. He was also a preserved vehicle enthusiast, had a lot of his own stuff, and the yard that they had at Ixworth, nothing ever seemed to leave. Things got withdrawn, they were just parked up and things were sort of pushed further and further at the back of the field. Jack got to a stage, I think, where he sort of disenchanted with the sort of preserved vehicle movement, and he advertised a lot of his stuff for sale, so the museum took the opportunity to acquire the OB at the auction in 1975. One of the reasons for that was because it had been bought new from, I believe, Botwoods, who were the Ipswich Bedford dealers.
So after the museum acquired it, was it restored straight into Mulleys livery?
It was very tired as acquired. It had only ever run in Mulleys colours. Like a lot of the stuff, before the museum had a permanent base, things were kept in barns here, there and everywhere around Suffolk or the Ipswich area. In the 1980s we were able to take some space in this building while it was still a working depot, and the vehicle was initially restored, I think, by a manpower services scheme, which was like a job creation scheme that existed in the 80s. And when it was originally restored, it was done in the livery of JDW, who were an Ipswich firm, and it had a bluebird logo on the side, and everyone used to refer to it as the Bluebird coach.
Yes, because they did operate OBs originally themselves.
They did, yes. They had, I think they had 2 or 3 that were new, but they also acquired some second hand. There were not really many people that didn't own an OB, yes. You know, to be honest. At one stage or another, most transport firms in the passenger side of the business, apart from like the corporation bus firms, would have had probably 1 or 2 examples.
So when did the restoration to this Mulleys condition get completed?
This was done, I believe, in 2002.
Right.
So obviously we ran the coach in the Bluebird livery for a number of years, and then the decision was made to return it to the original livery, which was the only livery that it ever really ran in service in.
Yeah.
Unusually, because it spent its entire life with one operator, which was Mulleys.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, quite a unique history for an OB.
Absolutely. How do you take on something like this? Because mechanically, did it require a lot of work?
It had a full rebuild at the time. To be honest, since that date, because they're a pretty basic, simply engineered vehicle, most of the running gear has just been maintained. Last year we had to do a full rebuild of the brake system, because they're a servo hydraulic brake system. All the seals need to be replaced and the cylinders were all sleeved and machined, but those are pretty basic service items, and the rest of it is pretty sound, to be honest. If you look after them and you don't wear them into the ground by
Yeah.
using them and doing lots of mileage, they can last a long time.
Well, I think that's evident in the external condition, because if
You would hope so.
this paint job is what, 22 years old now then?
Yeah, but that again is also the advantage of having a half decent building.
Yeah.
You know, you sort of keep them in good condition, and you hopefully don't have to spend too much time on cosmetic stuff in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's a credit to the museum.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So there you have it, 6 brand new models that continue EFE's Bedford OB legacy. Now, if you'd like to find out more, please watch the Bachmann British Railway announcements on the morning of November the 6th at 9:30 AM. Meanwhile, I'd like to thank Mark and Owen and the Ipswich Transport Museum for hosting us today, and we'll see you next time.